In this Redshift tutorial, we're going to cover proxies. Before I give you an overview to proxies, let's start at IPR to have a look at our scene. As you can see, in this scene we have a couple of trees scattered on this geometry using a particle instancer. In later versions of Maya you can also use Mesh to scatter trees, but to make this scene compatible with all the versions of Maya I decided to use a particle instancer. Redshift's proxies are extremely useful as they allow you to place previously exported proxy geometry in your scene without having to load the geometry. The geometry is actually only loaded at render time and it's exported in a Redshift optimized file format, which helps with scene translation times and render times. In this Redshift tutorial we're going to cover how to create proxies, how to import them back into your scene, how to do material overrides, as well as how to create and override visibility flags and so on. So let's quickly dive into the scene and let's have a look at what's going on. I'll hide our layout and let's have a look at the original trees. As you can see, I have a HDRI in the scene as well as a directional light interlighting group. If you open the oak trees geo group, you can see the different trees that we have in our scene. If I just go into the perspective camera and leave the IPR running but change the camera to perspective, you'll see one of the proxy trees. All of these trees were created with Maya Paint Effects, and I just converted the materials to Redshift materials. As you can see, we have a couple of different trees and we also have an animated tree over here. So if I scrub the timeline, it has a tiny bit of wind going through it, which will demonstrate how to export animated proxies. So first, let's export our Oak Tree A proxy file. To create a proxy, you need to stop rendering, so I'll just pause the IPR, select our tree, go to the Redshift tab, Proxy, and Export Proxy. As you can see, the Maya pop-up window will pop up, and make sure that the file of type is to Redshift proxy. Sometimes it defaults to Maya ASCII or your default file format, so make sure you switch it to Redshift proxy. Once you have that, just type in your name, and as you can see, I already exported all of our trees, so you don't have to watch me export 5 different types of trees. But for now, let's just export this one as Oak Tree _A proxy, and hit export selection. As you can see, if you have a look in your command line, Redshift will tell you that Redshift says save the file, give you a path, and everything should be good to go. So once you exported all your geometry, I'll just hide my geo group, and now let's cover how to create proxies in your layout scene. I'll just start IPR again on my perspective, and let's cover how to create a proxy. So I'll just delete A so we can create one together. Go to Redshift Proxy Create. As you can see, it will create a Redshift proxy placeholder. Let's rename this to Oak Tree A Proxy. Under the Redshift Proxy tab, click on a little folder, navigate to our proxies, and load up proxy. As soon as the proxy is loaded, you can see that in the IPR we can see the tree rendering, and in the OpenGL viewport we can see a bounding box. By default, Redshift will always load each proxy as a bounding box, which helps display performance. However, if you would like a more accurate representation of your proxy to be displayed, you can always set the display mode to Preview Mesh. If you select Display Mode Preview Mesh, you can change the display percentage in your OpenGL viewport, which helps in a more accurate representation of your proxy while optimizing viewport performance. Now that we covered display modes, let's cover overrides. By default, Redshift will always render with the default object ID, tessellation and displacement and visibility settings that you set in the proxy when you export it. However, if you want to override these settings, you can always check the overrides, and in the proxy shape you can control the final overridden object ID, tessellation settings, displacement, and visibility. For example, if I have visibility enabled and turn primary arrays off, you'll notice how tree disappears. However, if I go back to my proxy setting and I turn visibility and mat override off, you'll notice how tree will still render. So make sure that you have the overrides checked on, and then all of these overrides in the shape settings will take effect. Now that we covered some of the overrides, let's cover some of the material modes that allow us to override specific materials or materials in our proxy. By default, proxies render with materials that are assigned and baked into the proxy when the proxy was exported. You can override materials that are baked into the proxy with materials in your layout scene by changing the material mode. From scene, assigned to placeholder allows you to override all the materials in the proxy by assigning a material to the placeholder. For example, as soon as I set from scene assigned to placeholder on proxy A, you notice how it renders as a Lambert, as the default material assigned to the placeholder is a Lambert 1. From scene, name matching with prefix allows you to replace specific materials in the proxy using name matching. For example, if I select from scene name matching with prefix, you'll notice how the bark will turn pink and the leaves stay the default material that were exported with the proxy. Name matching with prefix is extremely useful if you have two proxies that share a material that are called exactly the same. For example, if I select my proxy tree B and I select from scene name matching with prefix, you'll notice that because both of these barks are called exactly the same, they will both turn pink. What happens if I wanted to assign different materials to two of these proxies? In this case, I can simply use a prefix to differentiate between the two bark overrides. If I go to my hypershade, and here's my oak tree bark A underscore material, and you notice how we have our shader group here that are name matched. If I give this a prefix by, for example, A underscore, I go back to my tree and add prefix A underscore, you'll notice how now it's only this material that's being overridden. If I wanted to override this material with a different material, I can just select this shader group, duplicate the shader group, and now I can name this to be B, delete the number 1 to make sure that the name matches perfectly, and select this to be a green material. Now that if I go to my proxy settings and set B underscore, you'll notice how the barks are now rendering green. As you can see, name matching with prefix is extremely useful when you have materials that are named the same. Now that we have a quick overview on how material modes work, let's quickly reiterate on how to create the material overrides. So in this case, you can see that I have oak tree bark A material and oak tree bark A material in here, and we have two shader groups. Now one thing that I want to stress is that in your layout scene, the override material can be called anything. So I can name this pink and I can name this to be green, and it's not going to affect our rendering. What Redshift is looking for is the shader group name and not the actual material. The same thing applies to the material that you would like to override. For example, if we want to override oak tree leaves A material, in fact we want to override the oak tree leaves A sprite material that we baked out. So this you would normally not have in your layout scene. So we have oak tree leaves A sprite, which is the material, and we have oak tree leaves A sprite shader group, which is the shader group. Now this material is what baked into this proxy. So if you wanted to override this, we can create a new Redshift material. We can call this to be yellow. And what we need to name match, in fact, is the shader group. So the main thing that you're looking for is this shader group, and hit enter. Now as you notice, because we have these materials in our main layout scene, we are not allowed to call it the same name. So instead we will just we can either delete this, we only have this here for demonstration purposes. So if I delete it and we name match it, and if we go to our tree A, delete the prefix and set a yellow color for a material, you will notice how we are now successfully overriding. We can also use a prefix, so I can call this yellow underscore, and in here we can call the yellow prefix, and as you can see it will still render. Now one thing that's extremely important when you're overriding materials, as you can see, is that currently there is no way of accessing what materials are baked into the proxy. However, in future releases of Redshift, you will have ways of discovering what materials are baked into each proxy, which will make your life a lot easier instead of having to remember or having a list of materials that you baked into each proxy. For example, if I didn't have any of these materials in here, I would have no way of knowing what material is baked into this, so I would have to remember what shader group I'm trying to override. Now let's cover how to export and import animated proxies. If we close the IPR and go back to our geo group and hide the layout group, if you remember, I've shown you that I have a tree that's animated. So if I just play the timeline, you can see that there's some wind moving through the trees. To create an animated proxy, simply select the group, go to Redshift Proxy, export, and in the options just make sure that you have export as sequence selected. As you can see, I already exported this, so we don't have to do it again. I made a new folder, and once you set the timeline to be, for example, 50 frames and hit export with your name, as you can see, Redshift will create a sequence of proxy files that contain your animation. To create a proxy, once you exported it, if we just hide the group and unhide our proxy group, you can see that I already imported it. And if you go to the proxy settings tab, you can see how the only difference is that when you select your path, you just need to check use file sequence. If I now set it to be a preview mesh, just so you can see if I loaded the animation, as you can see, as soon as I hit the play button, you can see the animation playing. Another thing that I'd like to demonstrate is that you can also export proxies of proxies, right? So if I'm now in my layout scene and I have proxy trees instanced around, and now I wanted to bring in this forest into an even bigger scene that has other animations and so on, then we can easily do that. So if I stop the IPR, and now if we select the tree layout group and go to Redshift Proxy Export and select the forest layout and just overwrite it, yes, override. And now if we hide our layout and create a new proxy, navigate to our file folder, proxies, forest layout, hit OK, and let's just quickly hit the render. As you can see, now we have a proxy of proxies, so it's extremely easy to pass massive amounts of data and have a cutoff point in your pipeline when you're passing big amounts of data around in different disciplines and so on. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thanks for watching.